Hello, welcome to another Purple Insider Extra. Matthew Coller along with Sam Ekstrom from Purple Insider. And we continue our series, What Happened to That Guy? Looking at some of the mysteries and the players that either didn't get a chance or did not work out this year for the Vikings. And for this episode, we look at Mackensie Alexander. Now, Sam, Mackensie Alexander seemed to avoid a lot of the criticism from the fan base this year, but when you look at the numbers, maybe was deserving of a little more. He ranked by Pro Football Focus as one of the worst cornerbacks in the NFL. And there were a lot of big moments where opposing quarterbacks took advantage and targeted Mackensie Alexander for big plays, including in Arizona on a fourth down where Kyler Murray just threw the ball up, completed a deep pass. There was also a long touchdown from Aaron Rodgers into Alexander's coverage, along with numerous others. If you look at the statistics, why do you think that his season, which was such a struggle, went under the radar?
Yeah, I just spent the last hour scrolling down the list of cornerbacks on PFF in coverage grade. He was 133rd of 134. Poor Baltimore with Kevon Seymour. He was last. But it's a hard one to explain because it never felt like in any one game teams decided to just target Mackensie Alexander and just pick on him the way that, for instance, Bashaud Breeland got picked on. Breeland was far more the focal point, it seemed like, of teams' focus. But Alexander seemed to decline in tackling, in coverage, in even blitzing the quarterback. They didn't seem to be sending him as much. And I wonder if he was maybe a little insulated in his previous stint with the Vikings when, remember, 16 through 19, their defense was sort of at the height of its powers. And Alexander was a piece of that as a younger player that benefited from having talent all around him, like playing inside of Xavier Rhodes for several years when the ball just wasn't going to that side of the field. It's pretty helpful to your development. Having Terrence Newman around to mentor you and help you watch film, that's pretty good too. Having, Sendejo and Smith on the back end, that'll protect you a little bit. So Alexander was insulated. And then this year he was part of one of the worst defenses in the league and was very much exposed. I think it's kind of as simple as that because he's not the only player that we saw have a worse season than usual on that defense. So I think that's probably the best way to explain it. It's not like he got old or declined physically. He was not injured really in any severe way during the season. So it's hard to explain other than just, I think it was kind of a bad defense and he was kind of pulled down with that.
And I think that it really shows you year to year how cornerbacks can be impacted by different factors. And I also wondered throughout the year, Sam, if they were trying to manufacture pass rush in so many ways that Alexander got left in man coverage more than he would have before. Because if you think back in their best years where you have Everson Griffin and Danielle Hunter and Tom Johnson and Brian Robinson, you had lots of guys who could rush the passer where you only needed to send 4 or 5. You didn't have to send a lot of blitzes. And I recall Patrick Peterson on a couple of different instances saying, we might have got too aggressive there. We may have blitzed a little too much on some of those big plays. And there were other times where maybe he was left out to dry by Xavier Woods not being in the right spot or something like that. But I think that it impacts everybody when you're forced to send extra rushers because you just don't have the front four pressure that you would if you had Danielle Hunter and Everson Griffin.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I mean, the Vikings were still, I think, tied for first in sacks or leading in sacks this year. So defensively, they found a way to manufacture, but they did so without having really anyone except Wanham on the last day of the season passing Danielle Hunter in sacks, who was out for 9 games or 10 games. I mean, they kind of used the team approach, and that meant getting Nick Vigil and Blake Lynch and Eric Kendricks involved. It was not a result of their front four pressure. They kind of had to get pressure by bringing those linebackers a lot of time. That would be helping a slot corner like Mackensie Alexander. So that theory totally makes sense. And I think we have to realize, too, that he was not a remarkable player in his best years. He was a solid player, but he never did anything to wow. I think he just wasn't really culpable for a lot of bad things happening. But it's not like you looked at Alexander and said, oh my goodness, I can't believe they let them walk away. You saw what he was worth to the Cincinnati Bengals in free agency, which was not very much, and then what he was worth to the Vikings the next year in free agency. So clearly his value is not sky high, and maybe we overestimated his worth just a little bit when he signed.
Yeah, I think that that's a good point, that when you looked at what his impression was when he was here before, he was part of teams that were very, very good when he was here before. But the league evaluated him and said, no, that's not a guy that we want to act like he's anything more than a replacement level player, basically a $1 million deal. I was going to also bring up the fact, Sam, that in what happened to this guy, I mean, over the years, we could do lots of these episodes on what happened to guys when they come back after leaving. Everson Griffin was good for a stint coming back after leaving. But aside from that, I have a really tough time thinking of too many players who returned and then just kind of pop back to their old selves. Usually this is how it is in the NFL, where a couple of years down the road, sometimes things have changed, and the previous Vikings regime had this real loyalty to anyone who had played on the defense before, especially that they wanted to bring back Shamar Stephen. They wanted to bring back Tom Johnson, and then Mackensie Alexander is part of that. And I think it was maybe an approach that was flawed, of thinking that players who were once something, even a few years down the road, would return and be the same people.
Yeah, add Sheldon Richardson to the mix too. It seems to be a big thing on the defensive line, especially. Andrew Sendejo is part of that mix, and it was kind of all based around the theory that what we had in 2016, 17, 18 was so good that anybody associated with that will be good too. And that's just untrue. I mean, that was a unit of 11 guys that played together for multiple years, a lot of them young and improving and hungry and trying to get paid. And they just had all of these various motivations, and it was the perfect storm. Like that kind of defense only comes around once in a blue moon. It was historically good, and you can't recapture that. You can't recreate those conditions, and you can't just magically snap your fingers and have guys go get 4 years younger when they had those motivations. It doesn't work the same way. So the Vikings were kind of chasing that, and that was part of their downfall, I think, with this regime. That's why Zimmer and Spielman are unemployed currently. And Alexander was, another sort of bargain bin swing that they tried to bring in to try to, as the panacea to this defense. And it did not help, obviously.
Right. If you put a bunch of average players with all great players, they probably are going to look better. But if they're around other average players or poor players, then their weaknesses are going to be exposed. And speaking of, getting exposed, I mean, they kind of did for just some of their poor moves and poor evaluations on this one, including trading away Mike Hughes for almost nothing to the Kansas City Chiefs, where Mike Hughes was a big part of the Chiefs defense. And he was a guy who could play outside or the inside. And so they evaluated it and said, we'd rather have Mackensie Alexander than Mike Hughes. And I understand the injury potential there, but that ended up turning out to be kind of a key decision. And it was one that they made so early on and for so little return. It goes under the category of what happened to that guy. Also, what happened to make them think that Mike Hughes couldn't play anymore and that Mackensie Alexander would be a better option when Hughes has clearly turned out to be better in Kansas City. Just one of the myriad of player mistakes that they've made, which has led to this series. What happened to that guy? So if you haven't watched the other episodes, Wyatt Davis, Kellen Mond, we've talked about a few more players. Go check those out. Chris Herndon, if you're wondering where that 4th round draft pick went, check out that video as well. And make sure you listen to the Purple Insider podcast. We got coaching search, GM search, and quarterback questions as well. So we're podcasting there every single day, and purpleinsider.substack.com for our written work. We'll catch you later.